Sniffle, or Sniffles, also known as the Sniffle, is by far the oldest character in the SlimeVerse, not just from when I created him, but also in the lore. What he isn't exactly known, it's only known to himself, but he appears to be an ancient, anomalous hedgehog that travels through the multiverse and travels through time, collecting socks, and each sock represents a different aspect of his original source. That's what he claims, but for all we know, he could just be doing it for fun. Now you see, in the SlimeVerse, souls are a very real thing. Each character has their own soul, and this links to a concept called oversouls. There are many different types of oversouls, but only a handful of characters connect to a certain one, and Sniffle is connected to the main one within the SlimeVerse, or at least the one that is most relevant to all of the main characters in the SlimeVerse, but there are many, many others. Obviously, these oversouls exist in a higher plane, a higher dimension, their own realm, if you will, and he is the physical anchor connecting both of these realms together. He is like the oversoul manifested in physical form, because in order for it to actually have a life of all these different species and on all these different planets, it needs to have a physical connector, and Sniffle acts as that physical connector, as a little piece of itself in physical reality, which kind of is the thread of the SlimeVerse itself. He kind of like weaves all of them together, if that makes sense. But he also acts as an archivist for his oversoul, albeit in a very bizarre way, through a hedgehog and through a treehouse and through socks. But I think that is just how those concepts have been formed through the traits which the oversoul has, because his one and the one many other characters are connected to, they are quite goofy characters, they are quite silly characters, they are quite bizarre, so it makes sense that it would manifest in these bizarre ways. But basically, he will visit the place and the time that all these different incarnations live, and he will collect a sock for each one of them. And this sock essentially represents a book or a tape of their entire life. And he will store that in physical reality. He will archive that like a librarian in physical reality. So there is a physical record of what went on. And so it doesn't get lost, and so that it can be looked back upon. So the oversoul essentially doesn't need to start again in physical reality, if that makes sense. They can absorb the knowledge again and again and again, for however long they need, for whatever purposes they need, and Sniffle helps like that, helps with that. Physiologically, he is far more of a spirit than an animal, but he resembles the European hedgehog, Arenaeus europaeus, albeit in a slightly unusual way. He does have some aspects that aren't really accurate to how the real animal looks, such as under his prickles he has a golden colour, and he sometimes is seen with different coloured eyes, and even his prickles in that way can sometimes even be seen as more fair-like. So it is implied that he can change his form, most likely at will, but it is not known if he has any other forms or why he takes the form of a hedgehog even. Though, unlike some other entities you might hear of, He doesn't have any bad side effects at all. He can be interacted with, he can be touched, held, picked up, he can be filmed, he can be talked to, he can even be studied, but his physical components are unexplained, as you may see in this picture. One sample of his DNA shows nothing, almost like null, like there is literally nothing there. And then another one shows what resembles cells, but they seem to be made of almost gold or almost light. This also remains unexplained. But most interestingly, even the most advanced supercomputers on alien worlds, which are thousands, if not millions of years ahead of us, they do not seem to be able to decipher what he is exactly or how old he is, specifically how old he is. They tend to glitch, the servers spark, and even the files get corrupted, especially with his age. It mostly, usually, always just shows a bunch of random, unintelligible numbers, but obviously we can see from a lot of stories and from a lot of observations that he has no needs of a normal animal. He seems to need no water, no food, no sleep, at least from what is observed, but he has been seen eating and drinking, so he seems to can if he wants to, but it's not a necessity. And obviously the main thing, he doesn't seem to age, he doesn't obviously die, and he does not get injured. That is the most baffling thing I would say about him. There has been many times in quite a few stories where he should have perished and he was perfectly fine. So it seems his physiology is purely coming from a non-physical place, and so in that way nothing physical can affect it in any way, shape or form. Now his treehouse, his home if you will, seems to be his very own realm, which seems to defy all physics. How it was even created is completely unknown. How it works is completely unknown. How he gets it to travel is completely unknown, but I'll show you one theory in a second. But most notably, it can disguise itself depending on where and when it is. He mostly seems to disguise it as flora, for example, a tree on Earth or even a tree on an alien planet. So he or the house itself seems to be able to gather information of where it is from and quickly transform into something that would from first glance be unnoticeable as anything strange. Although most of the time the door is quite noticeable, but even when it is opened, you can see nothing through it. It is just blackness, and some things have attempted to enter it, but they don't seem to be able to get in. But as shown in this depiction, the main theory of how it travels is that it can go into that higher realm, that non-physical realm, that spirit realm, if you will, which basically transcends time itself. And he can, through that, he can go into there, spend as long as he likes there, and come out in any place or any time he wants. So even an hour for him in that realm could be thousands of years and millions of light years for us, which also makes his age pretty hard to gather, because it could be younger than we know, or it could be far older than we know. There is just no way of knowing. He has never answered that question as such, because he said it would be pointless, which is probably right. Though it is also thought that his house in that way just comes from his own mind and imagination and will, that he can basically create all the amenities in there that he likes. But what is known from dialogue is 2 places within there, and that is the life cinema, where he will somehow gather from the sock a recording of the incarnation's life. How this is done is only known to him, whether it is their entire life or just the best snippets of his life or everything they need, like with the Oversoul needs a particular thing that incarnation has learned and grown from. Maybe it's just that and they don't see all the rest of the information because it's not really relevant, or maybe they have some way of skipping through it, or he likely doesn't uphold any semblance of time in our own way, so he very well might watch through these entire lives. And if that is an incarnation that lives for 1,000,000 years, then that has some pretty terrifying implications, if I do say so myself. And secondly, one of the most interesting and strangest places of all, I would say, even perhaps this is very bizarre for the SlimeVerse, as you will come to see. The SlimeVerse is a very bizarre place, but even this would be considered quite weird, and that is somehow he seems to have an entire void or entire universe entirely to himself in one room, where he simply places his socks in, and it's called the sock void. And over time this has coalesced. I don't know how it is coalesced, how the gravity would even work in there, but somehow it is coalesced into an entire planet made of socks, which is 1.5 times the size of Earth. To put that in perspective, even if he did gather 1 sock every year, that would still take 3.2 septillion years. And if he is looking through an incarnation or multiple, if every incarnation, say, lasted 1,000,000 years, which they would all be pretty random, but say even on the highest calculation, if each incarnation was around an average of 1,000,000 years, that would make him 3.2 nonillion years old, which is a 3.2 followed by 30 zeros, making him one of the oldest things in existence. But this is all just a guess, of course. All of this combined probably makes him one of the oldest and knowledgeable and possibly powerfulest entities in the SlimeVerse. So we're lucky he's just an innocent little hedgehog, because he is nearly as old as infinity. He has knowledge from possibly trillions of different people and different lives and different species and planets and experiences, and he cannot physically age or be damaged in any way, shape or form. So I will let your mind sit on that for a bit of time. Moving on to his name, however, this is also unknown, but it likely comes from his voice, because when he is speaking English, which he seems to also be able to, unsurprisingly, speak a lot of languages, his voice is almost, for lack of a better term, like he's got the sniffles or like he's got a cold. So that is most likely where it has came from. But we did come up with an acronym, which is the Sojourning Nonsensical Immortal Form for Linking Essences or Entelogy. Though he's also just dubbed the Spirit Hog, or just, Sniffle. In terms of who he is and his personality, he definitely seems to be quite innocent and benevolent. He seems to just have a very simple goal of collecting socks and enjoying himself. He's quite simplistic in that way, but although his ultimate motives are obviously on a much higher level and are unknown, he surprisingly seems quite down to earth and quite practical in some senses. He's definitely intelligent, far more than a normal hedgehog, and probably far more than most entities given his age and experiences and knowledge. But he does have the ability to talk, but it's in, as I said before, lack of a better term, it's in a sniffly, childlike voice as if he's a little kid with a cold. But he is also generally quite childlike. He's very curious and wants to know things and asks questions, and he's always wanting an adventure. He can't seem to keep still. He just wants to go and do something, anything, for the most part. He has accompanied characters a few times, though he claims they're on his days off, and he does have a goofy and mischievous side, like when he hides or steals socks from people, or runs away, or just says or does things that don't seem to make much sense or have any purpose. But he is also nice, he's also kind. He tries his best to comfort people and give them advice when necessary, but it seems he mostly just interacts with others for fun and is mostly focused on his own goals, whatever they may be. He does answer some questions about himself, but they're mostly vague, and he doesn't really go in depth into the information. But that is all I have to explain about him today. I'm sure he will most definitely appear in future content, and I hope you enjoyed. I just thought he definitely deserves to be the first video because, as far as I remember, he was my very first creation. But this video was explaining him to the best of my ability within the SlimeVerse lore, and I will get into my own personal reasons of why I have created these characters, but they're kind of a different type of video for the future. But I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that was interesting, and I can't wait to share more. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now. Have a wonderful day.